Welcome to the Sharks Cast podcast. This is episode 9. I'm joined by the lovely Faith Coleman here, who's an ecologist of estuaries. She's a PhD in environmental science, and this makes up a huge Sharks Cast episode today, because what we're getting into obviously is affecting South Australia massively right now. It's an ecological disaster.
Absolutely, Anton. It's good to join you as well today.
Yeah, thanks so much for responding to my call out to have as many different experts in this field come on the show and just really break down what exactly is going on at the moment from an academic point of view. Obviously, there's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of theories. This is an emotionally charged environment that we are in at this point in time, but it's where people like yourselves who have a wealth of knowledge and a lifetime of experience studying this sort of activity that can help provide a sort of, equilibrium to what's going on, and I guess a logical framework with how we can manage the situation that's unfolding before our very eyes, which is quite tragic. So, Faith, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into your field? I know you have quite a remarkable story. This is something that your family is well and truly enveloped by. You're immersed in ecology essentially, aren't you?
Absolutely. Well, I was born right up in the northwest of West Australia on a place called Dampier, and it's in a big salt field in Saline up there. And so my family have always, as long as I've been around, been working in saline environments and the blooms of algae that come as a result of different things that occur. So I was brought up in some of the most remote areas of Australia. A bit feral, a bit country, and spent a lot of my life trying not to follow the family dynasty, but doing it anyway. But I came to South Australia in my early teens, and one way or another, I didn't do so well at school. I wasn't very good at doing what I was told perspective, as many teenagers are. And so I ended up very, very early on working with my mother in her laboratory at Dry Creek at the salt field there. And I remember being called up. I'd travelled to China with my family on a scientific expedition looking at salinas there and a few other places. I met some amazing people, and I'm in the research laboratory at Dry Creek, and I get a phone call from a professor friend who said to me, "Faith, you've got to come in and meet with us." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, come in, I'll tell you." And I got in there, and there's my friend and a series of other people. I had no idea who they were, all very senior looking, and I'm very teenager. And I said, "Bill, what's up?" And he said to me, "Well, Faith, all of the professors here have been sending students to Dry Creek to be supervised. And they thought they were being supervised by your mother, and they were supervised by you. And they have just worked out that you not only don't have a degree, but you didn't finish year 12 and you're not even 16. And so I pointed out to him that was more for them than me. And he suggested that it was time I got some formal qualifications, because I had already published in a scientific journal and done a lot of other things at the time. And they came up with a plan. I went to TAFE in the evening for 2 years and did some research there and ended up teaching there for a little while. And then I got recognition for the research I'd done and allowed into this society called the Royal Society of Science in South Australia, and ended up going into postgraduate studies. But I've got this little gap called a degree that was from recognition of experience. So that's a little bit of an unusual path, but it means that I tend to have a different approach to things than many others, a far more practical approach, which is useful. But yeah, it's not what you'd call your usual background.
There's just that many different pathways that people choose to go down, and it's not necessarily about the academic paper. As you were mentioning earlier, I was a bit bummed to hear that these big professors come in the office and all of a sudden face under the spotlight because she hasn't got a degree. I mean, but that's where having the experience and that in its own way becomes essential to any sort of, to whatever field you're in. So that is that's incredible. I didn't realize you were a feral back in the day, but look, I mean, you're not going to judge someone from face value, so that's uh, that's awesome to hear that. It makes me a bit more relaxed because I'm not the most settled of characters or have that background. So there you go.
I think that really brings to attention just how important it is to have different voices around the table. And I think you'll notice with this whole bloom thing that everyone who's had a view has come from a very different background, and each person has contributed hugely valuably to the discussion. I think of all issues that we've had, this has been one of those demonstrations that diversity gives us answers to problems we wouldn't otherwise find solutions to.
Absolutely, and that's why freedom of information is so important on Sharkwatch at this point in time. I've left that door open for as like a public platform where everyone can have their opinions openly shared, and obviously that's what Sharkwatch is about. It's a community founded organization. Obviously, I'm a member of the community with no sort of academic background myself, but what I do have is a zeal and experience out on SA's local coastal waterways, and so do thousands of other South Australians that have come to join the party here. So that's where it's an open doorway, if you like, to commercial fishermen who have lived their lives on the water for decades and are taking a part of that family lineage and the tradition that they have out in the water, right to the very recreational fishermen that have been fishing on jetties for 40, 50 years and even longer, that they can bring a sort of piece of information that can be quite wealthy. It might even be the sort of missing piece to the jigsaw puzzle, so to speak, to anything that a researcher is looking for, especially with the photographic evidence that we're able to obtain today. But obviously, in saying that, we don't want to get blown away going too far off course. We need genuine, substantiated evidence, and that's where we source information from people like yourself who are able to give us a lot more clarity and transparency behind the current situation, where a lot of that is unfortunately void at this point in time. So thanks again for that breakdown. Why don't you tell us a bit about? It's important to know a bit about Faith's academic background, academic history, apart from the feral history. Why don't we go into your the time you spent studying and how that's led you to this awesome career pursuit you're on today, literally traveling around the world with your very own company, specializing in this unique field of saline ecology and estuaries.
Okay, so when I decided not to do my year 9 and 10, I ended up working in a laboratory that did exactly plankton counts for salt fields. And so we were counting how many dinoflagellates and diatoms and other organisms were in water, in marine water that we pumped into ponds, because a salt field needs to keep a very careful balance. They need to have no algae blooms in the early ponds as they evaporate salt water to make salt, but towards the end they like to have a flagellate algae, in many ways similar to a dinoflagellate like we have for here, but it's a non-toxic one that makes beta-carotene, which is vitamin A. They need that to bloom in the final pond to increase the evaporation. So it's a really fine ecological balance. So I was doing a lot of that. Professor Bill, who got me to do this TAFE course, ended up getting me to publish some papers in international journals, so that because I'd made observations around where species occurred and which salinities and temperatures they occurred in. And so he got me to publish those. And the man who ended up being my PhD thesis supervisor, I was introduced to him, and I walked in as a young girl with a stack of black and white photographs of diatoms, which is another type of plankton, 200 of them. And I said, Professor Bill said you might confirm the ID on these for me. And he got all of his PhD students at the time to confirm the IDs. And so it's been really interesting. After I finished doing the the TAFE diplomas and got recognition for the first degree. I went off and did postgraduate in spatial statistics and remote sensing. So using things like the chlorophyll indices and things to work out what we're looking at on the ground, trying to hear with my very basic maths that I had at the time, trying to do postgraduate level mathematics on spatial matrices and things to work out whether a group of trees was rough and a certain texture so that we knew it was growing into the sea, mangroves, versus coming away from the sea, all done by aerial photography. So it was really interesting time. But I'm also been all the way through a member of something called the International Society for Salt Lake Research. It also covers estuaries and things. And so I travel around meeting people and talking about their estuaries. But about 12 years ago, I came to the Coorong, and there's a group of fishermen here who are struggling at the moment with the bloom. But before then, they were struggling with other blooms and carp herpes virus and seals and loss of plants in the estuary and lots of other things. And so they wanted me to do some research to put together what the Coorong used to look like before it got sick. And so they knew that what it needed to be restored to. And so I put together 130 years worth of research for them and all of their observations and managed to work out what the estuary used to look like. But that one was quite funny in the fact that the fishermen came to me wanting me to do that research. And I said to them, I'd love to, but you really can't afford it. And they said, it's okay, we've got a plan. And I said, and what's that plan? And they said, well, we spoke to this person. His name's Professor Peter Gell, which turns out to be the person who identified those diatoms for me. And he says he knows you and that you really need a PhD because you've done this work for 20 or 30 years. And so you need a PhD. So he thinks that we should pay you to do a PhD and he'll get the government to pay the other half. And so I ended up doing a PhD because the Coorong fishermen wanted their research done cheap.
How's that? Yeah. How's that for a deal?
I'm not sure that I got the bonus out of that one.
Oh, I'm sure they'd just be grateful of that nonetheless. I mean, there you go. There's that photographic evidence and how it comes into play right there, isn't it?
It is. We found the most amazing things, differences between people who'd done soil cores and fishermen and their diary entries and catch records. And of course, those fishermen have been incredibly supportive, and they're the ones who often speak to overseas people and say, "Hey, this woman's done this for us. Can maybe you'd like to talk to her?" And so it's been word of mouth from people who've worked with me, and the Coorong fishermen are a big part of that.
Yeah, I mean, you're building up quite the fan base and quite the network here in SA by the sounds of it. So, yeah, keep doing what you're doing. I mean, it's going great places. You're obviously a useful asset now with the knowledge that you have. So, why don't we segue now into how you've again become obviously such a vital asset in terms of your research background into how this algae bloom started. I know that I mean, me myself, I found out about the bloom back in late February, I believe, when people started having adverse reactions, going out for a surf down at Middleton. And to be honest with you, I didn't really think much of it at the time. I thought, okay, maybe this is just going to be isolated to that part of the coast. We'll probably in the next few weeks or months, it should be all good and it should just pass on. Now we're in the middle of July and it's turned into an ecological catastrophe. And the scale of the destruction simply is unfathomable. We can't measure just how much destruction has been caused. And credit to the public and whoever is out documenting all of this, it's basically gone to the point where it's rapidly affected each and every one of us who live and breathe coastal waters in South Australia. And it's going to have a bigger impact, not just on us from a surface level going and visiting the beaches, but there are livelihoods that are at stake here. There are industries that are being destroyed. There are family legacies that are on the line at this point in time. And this is in the case of 6 months that this is just unfolded. So, Faith, what have you found in your time of in your time of research so far? When did you first find out about the bloom, and how much time have you devoted to studying the current situation?
Okay, so I found out about the bloom early March, I think, was actually the date that Anthony Rowland came out and was really noisy about the symptoms he was getting. And he was speaking to a reporter called Caroline Horn. And she and I regularly meet once every 3 or 4 months to talk about issues in the Coorong and other places. And so she rang me up and she said, this fellow's really struggling and there's some obvious symptoms and there's some issues. And now we've found these fish kills. And she says it also ties in with this fellow I interviewed down at Robe, who's got a commercial fisherman who's got nasty sores on his arms and is not catching any fish. Can you talk to them for me? And it's not usually the role of a reporter to do that, but Anthony Rowlands. And I said to him, hey, mate, how you going? Is there anything I can help with? And he said to me that he had been trying to identify what the problem was for a while, by that stage, almost 9 days, and he couldn't get any response out of government. And so I said, it's okay, get a community member to get a sample to us and we'll identify what's wrong for you. And we did that, and we got him, by the time we organised a community member and so forth, it was 11 days into the process that we managed to identify this thing within about 20-30 minutes of getting a sample from a community member from Victor Harbour who dropped it off to Perry. It took the state government, because they were trying to be, there's a difference with identification of these things. You can be really, really, really accurate, so accurate that nobody can doubt you, but it takes forever. Or you can be 90% right and get the results so much quicker. And so we were the 90% right. We knew that if we were wrong, it was something worse than what we thought it was. And it was unlikely to be the worst option. So we'd bracketed what it was likely to be if we were wrong, and gave advice according to the best data that we had. The South Australian government came out with their data some days later after that, even though they got this big head start, because they were after being 100% accurate, unrefutably accurate. And that just cost a lot of time, which was unfortunate for all of us, really. It set everyone off on a bit of a bad foot. But anyway, so that was sort of interesting.
Could you say that on that part, the state government was trying their best to at least, how do you say, be as certain as possible, at least? Could you say to a degree that they were exercising a level of public relations that was trying to be as transparent as possible without causing any sort of adverse reaction among the South Australian public, obviously being in their position that they are?
Yeah, so our public servants are very nervous at doing what they call spooking the horses. And so they don't like to upset the public unduly. And there's a lot of really good reasons for that. And so they like to be absolutely correct. And we all know that COVID made people very nervous about making the public upset about risks that may or may not have been there. And so there was a series of concerns within our public sector around that. They're very risk adverse. And it's really rare for a marine algae bloom to have human health effects like this one has. And so that made them very, very nervous. And so, yeah, it was more than anything a degree of lack of preparedness. They weren't prepared for a bloom like this. Previous blooms we'd had were in fairly low populated areas, of humans at least. And so they just didn't know what to do. And so they were trying to be as accurate as possible. There is absolutely no doubt that we have a vast number of public servants here who care very, very deeply about this bloom. When the guys at Middleton organised the forum that was held at Middleton around it, I was rung up in the 3 days before by 42 different government staff who wanted me to know that they were really, really concerned and they were really, really worried, and that they wanted to give me any data they could, but of course they didn't have the data that I wanted, or they didn't have access to it. But they were also too frightened to come along to the meeting in case conspiracy theorists and stuff cornered them, or in case, they got into trouble with the minister or said something they shouldn't. And so it's not good to have our public sector in a position that they're that frightened of stepping out of place. My family was involved in the marine parks discussions a long time ago, and at the time several recreational fishers were arrested for bringing guns to the consultation sessions, and that was a challenge to stand up and attend those forums up the front. I wasn't one of the speakers, my mother was, and many of our friends. And so that experience made many of our public sector very, very cautious, possibly, definitely way too cautious than they otherwise would be. And I think that's what's made this challenging every step of the way, is our public sector are very risk adverse. Of course, the challenge now is that over many decades of being overly cautious, people like PIRSA will not share their data publicly at all. In fact, many of the commercial fishermen will tell you with their plankton counts they get given, their counts are, they go like this: total plankton, percentage of diatoms, dominant species. And so they pay for all of these tests to happen, these plankton counts, every fortnight or whatever it is that they do, and that's all the result they get. And what they need to know is how many dinoflagellates there are and how many diatoms and maybe how many carina and all of this stuff, but they're just not getting that data, even those that have paid for it. Whereas if we were a little bit braver as a society, especially with our public sector, and we're happier that our public sector took the approach that they'd be mostly right all the time, rather than entirely right all the time, that maybe we might be able to get that data out into the public domain. And so that's always that challenge, isn't it? Because we're dealing with an issue that has a huge amount of uncertainty in it. We're never going to be 100% correct. I was talking to someone the other day and I said to them, see this pencil or pen in this case that I have in front of me, that's the knowledge that we have around dinoflagellate blooms and how they function in the marine zone. The rest of this room is what we don't know. And
Wow.
so, yeah, it's a huge problem. In the 90s, when I first started doing dinoflagellate work and microalgae work, the species that we're dealing with now has been divided into 28 different species. So what is now 28 species was one species when I started, and most of those divisions done in the last 6, 7, 8 years. And so you look at the research and you go, is this species that we're dealing with here, or is it another species entirely? Their genetics are so complicated. So if you think about the Human Genome Project, which was a huge scientific project where we tried to map the human genome, and it took us decades to do so, the DNA in one of these little algae is multiple times that of a human DNA, 30, 40 odd times in some cases. And so you don't think about it. You think a smaller, simpler organism would have less DNA, but they have more. And what's more, half of their genetics is asleep at any one point in time, or dark. And so they can actually turn on different genomes at different times. So you might think you know a species, and then it gets short of nutrients, or the water temperature changes, or something starts eating them. We know many of the carina become more toxic as other things start eating them. And you suddenly realize we don't know anything that we thought we did.
So that room just continually expanding. There you go. So I wanted to touch on the point quickly, of where we were before in regards to the government's response. And I guess to have your perspective on that, with the past meetings that you've been to, it's important that people see that side of things. But on the same token, it has a twofold effect, that it almost makes the government look cowardly for not coming out into that open space. And look, to all of the viewers in the audience here watching this, look, I'm in no way trying to defend the government or take sides in any way. I'm simply here trying to share two perspectives of things. Faith, I've had multiple fishermen contact me, and just through general chatter have mentioned about how they've sent off multiple emails to different environmental ministers and people part of the state government, different reps, and they haven't even got back to them by the slightest. So this is where, the concern is. There's no real, I can see why they view it as if there's no, not even empathy, but just ability to understand that these are people's livelihoods on the line here, and they're not even giving back the very basic responses. I mean, this is too quiet in that sense. These are people that need responses because they're not getting fishing licenses for the next year. So I just wanted to elaborate on this part of our discussion.
It is really challenging. It's and it is. They're cowards in many ways, and I hate to say that because many of them are dear friends of mine. But I remember someone saying to me, another agency saying to me, "But Faith, you can get out the front of those meetings and you can have that talk because you're brave." And I look at them and I've got a poster behind my screen that you can't see, which is a picture of 2 feet on a beach. And it basically says that courage is fear walking. And I guess the challenge here to all of our public sector and to the community to allow them to do it is to embrace the fact that they are frightened about how the community will respond. They are horrified at the impact it's having on communities. They don't like upsetting people. They don't know what to do in this situation. But despite all of that, we all have to be brave and let that fear walk. You're doing that. I'm doing that. I watch the fishermen do that every day. It's part of embracing uncertainty, is recognizing that we will often be at least partially wrong, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all a part of the journey. So this is where we need to put our pride aside and our egos aside and really cop it on the chin if we're wrong. But also, we need to be uniting together as an entire state. So obviously the news that came out about the federal government about how they knew about this early on is very disappointing, to say the least. So yeah, we do hope that there is something that comes of that in a positive light. I wanted to move on where we're going so deep into where we're going, and I can see your passion is taking up so much of the time slot we have today, which is amazing as well. You're talking so much about all the different species and the field that you've invested so much of your life embarking on. So I'm grateful for that. I've learned so much as well as we've gone on. So this is all a part of the journey too. Getting back onto the algae bloom, so far, you spoke about how Anthony Rowlands, and shout out to Anthony, he's so boisterous on Shark Watch as well. I've seen him in the comments a lot, and he's doing a great thing by trying to advocate these different groups and helping people out in the comments section. So shout out to you, my friend, and I do hope to hear from you soon again. Just I guess just going through that timeline of events, you had the samples being brought back to you, and from there,
what happened is, so we identified it, but what was really interesting at the same time is there's this interesting conversation going on with this fisherman down at Robe. And what we discovered when I finally went down to see him was that the area around Robe was entirely missing of any plankton when I went down there, but there was lots of dead dinoflagellates. So Carinia is a dinoflagellate. There was lots of dead dinoflagellates that I couldn't identify in the bloom that was there before, but it was dead. And so it set Janine off on a path of having a good look at the dead sharks and other things that had been found throughout the southeast. And I started trying to put together some of the other data around there. And what we both came to the decision of separately is this bloom actually started near Robe, probably in January. And the fishermen there had called PERS out to have a look at it, but they hadn't known what they were looking at, obviously, and had claimed there wasn't anything there. So this is a really interesting development because it helps us work out how it started. And so what we know, or what we believe to be true now, is that we've got this large blob of hot water that's moved across the bottom of the Gulfs from West Australia across. And as it moved in last year, it caused the Bonnie upwelling to flow really, really, really hard. And it stirred up all of the nutrients from the River Murray and stuff that had gone down into the canyon. And we had a huge diatom bloom that was visible from space, but that's not what we've got now. When the blob of hot water stopped moving into place, though, the Bonnie upwelling stopped flowing, and it didn't flow at all this year, and we didn't have any of those nutrients coming up from the upwelling this year. Instead, all of the waters in the nearshore environment near Robe and up through the Gulfs didn't get their usual cold water flush that they previously got every year. And the waters in the Gulfs and that area around the Bonnie upwelling just north of Robe there got 4.5 degrees at times hotter than they normally would. And it killed all the seagrass and the algae off. So it killed a lot of the stoneweed, as the fishermen call it, off. It killed the kelps, the seagrasses. They all died back, and we had a heap of stuff come up onto the shore early in autumn and late in summer that you normally wouldn't have until winter. And that rotted in the warm water, and that, of course, is what produced the nutrients that the dinoflagellate, the Carinnia, has thrived on, because it doesn't use normal N and P like fertilizer. It eats things, dissolved organic carbon, rotting seaweed, bacteria, other things. So it actually, even though it does photosynthesize, it gets most of its nutrients from rotting matter. And so that's why the bloom's done so well. And even though the water is cooling, and that's where we get into that conversation about the water is cooling, it should go away. Even though the water is cooling, the currents that would normally flow have been suppressed because this warm mass of water is still sitting off the mouth of our gulfs, stopping those currents that would normally come through, doing their thing. So we still have this increased dissolved organic matter in the gulfs and the nearshore waters. And so that's where we think this was caused now. Best we can tell, obviously, it's one of those 80-20 rules. We're pretty much 80% certain we're right. There's a bit of uncertainty still. So when you look at something like that, it would have been impossible for anyone to stop it happening, unless we'd done more work on climate change and restoring benthic habitat prior to this.
Yeah, so I actually came across an article from PIRSA regarding the bloom situation, and it looks like they're starting to release a bit more information on perhaps the potential causes of the bloom. And it's interesting to see that they've listed one of the potential causes as the 2023 Murray River flood that caused a lot of nutrients to come down into the Southern Ocean from the Coorong. So that's another potential cause.
What happened, that thing that you're looking at is a summary of a workshop they had with 70 public servants and a couple of community members and a couple of scientists about a month ago. And those potential causes are the result of people putting forward their views as to what could have caused it. There has been no testing apart from the marine heatwave one. There has been no testing to see if any of those others are correct. The one that we know because we have the data for is the marine heatwave situation and the blob. The person who put the Murray River forward as an option put it forward when the bloom was just at Middleton and no further really than that, and it made sense in that scenario. It doesn't make sense when you think that it started at Robe, and it doesn't make sense when you now look at it stretching up the Spencer Gulf. You know, the Murray nutrients didn't get that far by any stretch of the imagination. And what's more, that was 2 years ago. And what we do know about nutrients that come out of the Murray is they go down the old Murray Canyon, which is a series of underwater channels where the River Murray used to flow, and they go down into off the continental shelf, and they come back up with the Bonnie upwelling, which is the other one that they've put in, is the extra long Bonnie upwelling that we had for a period there. But the last time the Bonnie upwelling flowed was, I believe, last September. And so you would have expected blooms to occur ever since those extra nutrients came here. You would have expected them since the flood, or you would have expected them since the upwelling, or and that's not what we've seen. And so I'm waiting for even one piece of evidence to support those particular scenarios at the moment.
Yeah, and another one of those theories was the desalination plant, which is it's getting a fair run, and I do understand why. There's a lot of really solid evidence behind that one, and it is getting a fair pounding on social media, so to speak. So, what's your take on that? I mean, obviously, the reason why I went straight to the desal plant from what you were saying is that, Janine herself, and when we're referring to Janine, folks, we're referring to Janine Baker. She's just done a phenomenal amount of research into what's going on. Like every day is literally lived and breathed this algae bloom. So Janine, shout out to you, and thanks so much for constantly getting back to me so swiftly with a lot of the information that's helped me grasp what's going on in regards to the sharks and ray specimens that are washing up locally. So she herself's very passionate about trying to debunk that, and the fact that it didn't start where Lonsdale is. There is a desalination plant closer to Kangaroo Island that might suggest that it could have also started on Kangaroo Island. What's your take on that theory?
So if we are to go to the basics of the species of the bloom, okay, so Karinia mikimotoi, I am yet to find it in salinities higher than 37.5 grams per litre. Okay, it doesn't like high salinities. It breeds very, very quickly in low salinities. All right, Karinia mikimotoi is present in all of our gulfs, and it has been since the 80s in very, very low numbers. That plant has been operating for a long time. If it was going to cause a bloom, it would have happened by now. We do find Karinia does bloom in the discharges of some desalinisation plants. However, they're desalinisation plants that desalinate almost fresh water. And so if they're desalinising something that is 5 grams a litre and they discharge, 10, 15 grams a litre of salt, then you get a Karinia bloom sometimes in the discharge. And that's really a common thing. It does happen. And many desal plants work in those levels of salinity. Our desalinisation plants work on marine water, and what they put out is twice seawater salinity. Seawater salinity is 35 grams a litre. We really cannot tolerate with this species much more than seawater level salinity. And so on a salinity perspective only, that wouldn't have caused it. When we look at where the deaths occurred of all the marine life, they definitely started down towards the southeast, towards Robe. As we can tell now, the Lonsdale plant was the last place hit, literally the last place hit in the state, pretty much. It's working its way up the Spencer Gulf. So there just is no evidence to support that in this bloom. It may have occurred in other blooms elsewhere. It may promote other species. But with this bloom and the pattern of this bloom, it just doesn't support it. And there's an issue with an order of magnitude size difference as well. So we're dealing with, 20,000 odd cells per milliliter over 4,500 kilometres, 20 metres deep. There is no desalinisation plant in the world that would condense enough nutrients to cause that or stir up enough things. If there was a theory that the desal started it because it disturbed the sediment, well, there was dredging there last year. That disturbed the sediment more, and it didn't cause this bloom. And so when you actually sit there and use logic to step through and you go back to the original sources of the data and the original sources, the details about the species, it's just got in computing you call it air gaps. There's a gap between your computer and the screen because there's no cable. It's the same with data. We've got air gaps in the data around these theories where there's some physical impossibilities around how the chemistry would have worked.
Right. Yeah, because a lot of people were linking the timeline of events to the desalination plant's outflow of brine distribution. It had increased a substantial amount, obviously due to the drought. They decided to increase the amount of brine runoff, and that's what's gotten people so intrigued about that particular theory, because there is a genuine timeline to suggest that. But from
There
what you're
is, in
saying,
fact,
yeah, yeah,
they're actually fascinating in the fact that they are actually related, but not the way people think. So this big blob of hot water off the coast has actually prevented, those occasional summer storms that we get with rainfall. It's
yeah,
prevented those storm fronts coming up into South Australia. It's why all of our storms have gone further south this year and missed South Australia. So this big marine heat blob is a huge issue because not only did it cause this bloom, but it also caused our lack of rain in South Australia, which meant we had to turn the desal plant on. It's no it's no accident they're correlated. It's just not the way people think.
wow, wow. From a meteorological perspective, I appreciate that as well. That
Yeah.
just goes to show, yeah, it affects all facets of nature, doesn't it? Really. So at this point in time, now we've gotten into July. The obviously, again, the amount of destruction and devastation that's occurring all over the Gulfs, and even to KI, into the Southern Ocean, close to the shelf now. It's just beyond what we can physically able to document and measure. Do you feel like there's enough being done from the state and federal government to tackle what's going on at this point in time?
There's a few really strong things. I don't think we've taken a strong enough approach on climate change. I mean, it has to come down to that as a fundamental. This is the price we pay for that, and I think our state and Commonwealth governments have been a bit chicken on that, but so is everybody else. So that's the way it is. I also think that we need to find a way of being more open and transparent, and so that means putting all of that plankton counting data that they're doing, all of the brevetoxin data, everything that they've done as a result of everyone's phone calls to Fishwatch, need to find their way up onto a public portal. I don't believe that head veterinary reports on various things should be marked confidential and not shared, which is what's happening at the moment. And that's going to take some bravery on behalf of our agencies, obviously, but they're going to have to get there. And then I think that we need to set up a way that we can monitor plankton and the precursors to a bloom so that we know in future. So for our fisheries and our ecotourism ventures and for our surfers, we need to be able to go, that beach is not good, or we're going to get a bloom on that beach soon if this keeps up. So you may need to be able to come up with a way of moving your oyster lease to a less affected area. You might need to make sure that permitting and approvals are in place so that fin fishermen can fish from somewhere else while a bloom is going through, or an ecotourism person can go somewhere else. We need to have the things in place. We know that in smaller water bodies like West Lakes or the port waterways, there may be ways of treating the carina so that you don't get toxins in the water and you don't get the bloom in those areas. We need to have the equipment in place so that we can do that when it occurs, rather than going, we've got it there now, what do we do? And 2 or 3 weeks later, when we've got everything, we realise it's too late to treat it. And so we need to be a little bit more prepared. And I think Susan Close, after her meeting with the fisheries stakeholders, she said something along the lines of, now that we know these things happen, the industry has to work with government and put in place insurances and those sorts of things. And I think that applies right across the state, is we need ways of dealing with this, and we need to be really honest about the fact that we have many, many blooms every year or every few years in South Australia. Most of them are harmless. Most of them last a few days and then they go, which is what most of us hoped was the case at Middleton. An unusual place for such a thing to occur. Usually those occur in embayments. It's only retrospectively when we worked out it started at Robe that we realised that this wasn't going to be a short-term, short-duration bloom. If they last more than a few days or a week, we usually find they last 3 or 4 months. We're getting beyond that now, well beyond that now. And so now we need to start talking about what do we do if this doesn't break this winter? What supports do we put in place if this is going to be a next winter break when that blob of warm water moves on?
Yeah, yeah. I'm hearing now it's on the lines of 12 months, and I really, to an extent, wanted to look at, for some sort of positive at least, or just to grasp some aspect of logical reasoning that could perhaps make it seem so much less worse than what it is. And I do know that there is an element of exaggeration that comes with anything that is being reported on or covered by the media, the news. Obviously, Sharkwatch has that effect, whether unintentionally. This has been unintentional for myself, that over the years we've seen the media and particularly my page almost amplify local shark related matters. So whenever there's a particular trend that's going viral in the media, we tend to start, subconsciously looking for these things, and so the anecdotal evidence starts increasing tenfold. I've seen this alone with Sharkwatch, and I just hope that there's been some sort of exaggeration. There's an extent of exaggeration with the amount of marine mortalities we're seeing, because we do know that marine mortalities occur, and the amount of reports I'm getting to Sharkwatch documenting marine mortalities is in the hundreds. I haven't had the time to sit back and actually look at all the marine mortality. So, I'm praying that there's an exaggeration to an extent, but it's obviously this is past anyone's comprehension. And I mean, from what local fishermen are saying, they're crying out to me over the messenger. And, I had one that spoke to me earlier this evening saying a survey of all known wrecks and snapper fishing spots needs to be done ASAP by fisheries officers, for example. We're seeing now divers are going down to these popular diving spots and the ecosystems are destroyed there. They're barren. Other fishermen are saying that the Gulf should be closed altogether for any sort of fishing. So that way, whatever marine life that is currently in the Gulf, at least that those particular species, if there's a chance of them not becoming extinct, at least that may have a positive effect on speeding up the process of recovery in the Gulf, and preventing them from even becoming extinct. So I wanted to get your opinion on two things. First and foremost, what do you think from these very early stages? And this is the sad part. We're 7 months in now, or we're about 5 months in, sorry. And where this is still would be considered early stages, because this is something that's rapidly spreading right throughout our coastal and offshore waters, right throughout SA's expansive mass of water here that we have, oceanic and coastal. What do you think the scale is from this early time that we're in? What do you think the scale of damage is to the local marine ecosystem if we're talking a few years down the track, 5 or 10 years down the track? Is this something that you've started to think about in terms of the marine ecosystem? And the second question I had was, have you been able to gauge the economic impact from this early stage?
Okay. So there's a few things in there, isn't there? One about the media magnification. I guess I'll really quickly touch on that. It definitely does happen, that magnification. We all look for the worst things and the best things in life. And so there are areas of both Gulfs and Kangaroo Island that have escaped damage or large amounts of damage. There are areas around Victor Harbour, for instance, where all of the algae and things off the jetty are still in place and still healthy. And so not all of them look like the Edithburgh jetty, more than we'd like look like the Edithburgh jetty. The other things are some fish seem to be relatively immune to it or have swum out of the bloom. And so
That'd be like your salmon.
yes, that's right. And so salmon and snapper, and to a degree whiting, many of our pelagic fish, apart from the sharks, many of our pelagic fish seem to have found their way out of the bloom or have died where we haven't found them, but they're definitely not washing up on the shores. So there's a really positive out of that is that they seem to have escaped. Their habitat's been hit really badly. The other thing that seems to escape so far are many of our oysters, both our native ones and our commercial ones. I'm not hearing large reports of them dead. Toxic, but really, really, really healthy. They're removing the carina quite happily. They're an excellent natural predator or a grazer on the carina. And so it means that things like restoring oyster beds are going to be really good solutions in the future, and gives us a really, really obvious way of preventing a future bloom is expanding that oyster reef work that we're doing. So that's a huge tick to all of us that we're on the right path there. With regard to the damage, there are going to be species that we lose as a result of this. The degree of damage is so vast, and so many of our marine species were already so endangered, and there has been certain groups of species have been hit more than others. Many of our benthic species have been hit very badly. In the Coorong, we lost all of our tube worms and all of our polychaete worms and all of our crabs in one particular area of the Coorong, and that's what the shorebirds eat. So that's a major ecological impact that will take 2 or 3 years to recover. Areas like Edithburgh Jetty, I suspect, before they will come back and look reasonable. They will come back and they will look reasonable if this doesn't become a reoccurring thing. And so there are positives in amongst the bad. Only a small portion of the Coorong's been impacted, for instance. But the economic damage, because it's impacted on some of our most productive areas worst, the economic damage is huge, especially to individual small-scale fishermen. The large-scale fishermen that go off the coast a long way have managed to find places to fish, but the mum and dad artisan fishermen, the ones in the Coorong, the cockle fishermen, to a degree, the oyster fishermen at Stansbury and Kangaroo Island are devastating, the impacts on those families. The shark fisherman I was speaking to at Robe, it's his 7th generation. You know, you look at that and you see that he hasn't been able to catch fish since January. Yeah, those things are vast, and I have no idea really of the scale. I know that the oyster fishery is worth around 100 million, and it's probably impacted, I suspect, around 10 to 20% of that industry. The Lakes and Coorong fishery has taken a hit. It's probably lost 2 or 3 million in its turnover, so forth all the way down the coast. So we've probably lost, you know, somewhere in the vicinity of 30 to 50 million already, I suspect, in turnover. How long that will go, how long it will take to recover is anyone's guess at this stage.
What's quite interesting to see is that a lot of the different seagulls, for example, or birds aren't picking at the marine mortalities, which is one thing that I've noticed at least. Do you have a theory behind that? Like, do you have an explanation? I mean, people are asking, and for a good reason, should we be eating the fish coming out of our Gulf, even if they are healthy whiting, so to speak? I mean, if the birds aren't even picking at these marine mortalities, You know, do they know something that we don't, for example? Or do you think it's just a general, just sort of observation that I've taken way out of proportion?
No, and it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because in the Coorong, the fishermen noticed that the pelicans were eating a lot of the fish that was sick but not dead yet. Just before they went off to Lake Eyre. We don't know what happened to the pelicans after they went to Lake Eyre, but as far as we can tell, they went healthy. Um, and we noticed the seagulls ate a lot of the polychaete worms. But I suspect what's happening is there is so much dead stuff around, and there's still only the same number of seagulls. So I suspect they're taking the things they really, really like that you guys don't tend to notice. You don't notice dead polychaete worms washing up. You don't necessarily notice dead mussels and things. And seagulls prefer those often to picking a piece off a large carcass. And so I suspect it's just that they have so much to eat. They're kind of a little spoiled at the moment.
There's so much of a war zone really to cover at this point in time when it comes to fisheries officers, people working for SARDI, all of these different government research organizations. I guess they'd just be spread all over the place. Do you know? I mean, look, and again, I've observed from observations of what I've heard, they're simply not doing enough. But this is obviously from different individuals that are out on the water and they have their own different observations that they're noting. Do you know what exactly they are doing to try and stop the situation from unfolding at this point in time? Is there a heavy monitoring? Is there a heavy presence on the water from Fishwatch officers? Or, have you been in contact with fisheries officers? Are you regularly keeping up with government stakeholders? What's your experience been like working with these different government agencies?
Well, it varies, doesn't it? So the fellow who does the plankton counts for fisheries, there is one. There is one man in South Australia who does all the plankton counts, and he sometimes has PhD students and things support him. Okay? He is overwhelmed, burning out, and struggling, and often gets told off by various stakeholders because he's not doing enough and he's too slow and all the rest of it. So, and he's terrified he's got it wrong on some of the IDs too, especially now with brevetoxins in the water. That's a major thing. That's brevetoxins in the oysters. It's the first time that toxin's been detected in Australian waters, and so that's a major, major thing for fisheries. And I think that's got them running around in circles like mad things. In response to Fishwatch, I do believe they are still responding to every call they get out. I think they've probably given up on a few of them, but they're meant to be responding to every call and go and check everything out and take samples. I wish they'd release some of that stuff. In California and stuff, they actually have a portal where every single report to their equivalent to Fishwatch goes up onto a portal. And you write into there, I think it's algae, the water looked like this, there were these species dead, and then you see it checked off as somebody goes to check it out and you see their response to it. We don't have that here in South Australia. It would take a bit more work to do that, but it would mean that everyone would see what these guys are doing and feel that their views have been heard and their data has been heard. And we wouldn't necessarily need something like iNaturalist running in the background, in many ways duplicating many of the things that they've done. But given the fact we're well over 7,000 records in iNaturalist at the moment, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of staff that would be taken to responding to all of that. And so I guess that's one part of it, is I think they are trying really hard, but I think they're running around in circles a little bit and being very responsive. They're not being very proactive as far as sharing the data that they're collecting, which, of course, if you don't have the data, you assume it doesn't exist, which is a fair enough thing. And they are not coming up with very clear, the oceanographer at SARDI has done an amazing job with his weekly and sometimes twice weekly updates to do with the ocean conditions and the chlorophyll indices. He started that just after the Middleton Forum, and I've been really impressed with Mark's work with that. And as far as a public servant doing his job and communicating with the public on his research, that has been, a gold star every inch of the way. I've been really impressed by that. He hasn't always been 100% right, but he's given it a try, and it's been way more than anybody else. And so I've been really impressed by that. But
Give him a shout out. What's his full name?
his name is Mark. I won't name him fully on here,
All
but
right.
his name's on
What,
the
what
on
about
the
what?
thing.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry. What about the one guy who's counting plankton? Surely he
The
gets a
one,
shout. Yeah.
no, he would definitely not want to be named, but they're based over at Port Lincoln, so public
Surely he
servants don't
gets a
like
pay
to be named.
rise.
Oh, if they talk to the media, they get into trouble. But yeah, no. So when this is the thing is usually that would be the thing, and they could get praise for what they did, and they could get named, and that would be really important. And you do it automatically, and I do it automatically. We yell out to these amazing people who do things, and then you realize that our public sector's not set up these days to have that happen with their staff, and you go, that's so sad, because we do our work so that people get benefit out of it, and these guys never know that. All they hear is us whinging about them, because they get that loud and clear. Every time a minister hears they haven't done their job properly, they hear it. And so yeah, no, it's a challenge, isn't it? But so I think that they are doing lots of stuff. I think they're very, very lost. I think our public sector in South Australia has been cut very deeply over many years, especially the environmental section. And now they're, trying to do everything with nothing, so achieving next to nothing. Anyway, this is life, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And look, I mean, it's good that you hold your tongue and you have that composure, and I get it. It's just getting to boiling point now, and
Yeah.
this is where we can utilize these platforms again. iNaturalist, Shark Watch, Ozfish, all of these different utilities, if you will,
Mm.
ultimately amplify the matter even further, and it creates a real need for change. So if we can employ individuals from our own work to come down and grow this team that is so understaffed, I guess you could say.
We could do with the reservist team of people to do this sort of work. It's not worth hiring staff to carry this sort of load all of the time. But
Yeah.
at the moment, I've been working with a lady called Samantha. She used the last name C on social media, and she's bought herself a microscope. She was so frustrated, and this is the same solution for many of the fishermen. Some of them have got on board. The guys in the Coorong have bought their own microscope. You can see one behind me. Mine is a commercial grade one, but one of my suppliers is doing a really good deal on a citizen science level microscope, which is a lot cheaper than mine. And I have been training people in how to use these microscopes so they can take their own sample and do their own count. And democracy works when we have knowledge. We can't make good decisions unless we have good knowledge. And to me, this is taking the power back in a big way. And instead of saying fisheries are not doing their job or Dew's not doing their job, I just love working with people who say, I don't care, I'm going to do it.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's what we're doing here as well at Shark Watch, and this is why we're all coming together and making a difference. I might have to be thinking of outsourcing my own marine biologist potentially to grab some of these dead sharks to do my own autopsy reports here, special Shark Watch related
Well,
autopsy. But
Flinders Uni has chosen to do that. They're funding that work themselves.
I know,
Um,
but we're all independent though. This is a problem. We all choose to be independent. I mean, I'm out there trying to collaborate with everyone, but they all want to be independent. I mean, that's fair enough. They all do an amazing job. I'm not going to go here and bash them or, yeah. It's just like I'm in the position where hurry up. I want to get these necropsy reports so I can start, sending some quality results to everyone to make people more informed. But so, folks, I mean, I'm in the same boat as a lot of you, quite literally. So, no pun intended. But
I'll need to bring my microscope to visit you one day so you can see what you're looking at.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's it. Well, it was so lovely to have you on, Faith. I mean, you brought so much insight into what is a really vague vaguely reported marine catastrophe that's enveloped the state at the moment. And for South Australia, in all honesty, Faith, this is an insult that the matter's being handled, because we live and breathe here in South Australia some of the best waters in the world. And this affects local tourism. It affects the economy from a fishing scale. It affects people's mental health, because for most of us, this is a place of recluse. It's a place that we grew up and had many great memories, and it's literally being wiped away from us before our very eyes. And the fact that you've come on here really means a lot, Faith, and what you're doing has been outstanding. I mean, I couldn't fathom just how much work you're doing behind the scenes to monitor the situation. Obviously, you have your own business and family matters to tend to on the side of that. So I see that, and I respect that. And just to all the other, before you go, I guess to all the other marine researchers, whether government related or independent, did you have a few people you wanted to mention here that I think that would be open to want to receive some credit for the work that they're doing?
There are some amazing ones. I mean, you've mentioned Janine already. She has been outstanding as always, and that's the thing, is she has devoted 35 years of her life to looking after the leafy sea dragons and the other things, and I don't deal with animals, so I've always been really grateful that she does that. And there's Mike Bosley, Dr. Mike Bosley, who's done all of the dolphin stuff for so many years. He's been involved. There's Carl Charter, who's been having a chat recently on the media, who runs Experience Marine Sanctuaries. He's why so many of this state are so intent on the marine flora and fauna. You start going through the list, my dear mother, who sits there with her microscope writing lab reports every few days for community groups on their plankton samples that I volunteer her for. There's this amazing collection of scientists within the community who run their own businesses, do their own thing, but are also working together, and we email each other and we talk to each other, and when it gets too much, we offload at each other, and we forgive each other for that afterwards, which is always good, because we get distressed and hurt too. It's really hard. We're all feeling the load mentally. This is a long haul. For many Adelaideans, it's been a fairly recent affair, whereas the rest of us have been working on it for a very long time. And so I think that being kind to each other is really important. And there's the Rising Tide group at Middleton who held that first forum. They've been so good at rocking up to government offices and having little ceremonies for the dead animals and things, just to keep reminding people, it takes a village to raise a child, and apparently to fix a marine zone, it takes an entire state of people. And it's almost impossible to name everyone who's done an amazing thing for this one.
Yeah. And to each and every one of you, you know who you are, regardless of whether or not we've mentioned your name. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing, for the countless hours that you're spending trying to investigate these matters, with your expertise, with your knowledge, with the very little resources and the funding that you have, devoting a lot of your voluntary time to wanting to make a difference here. Get in touch with myself, and I would love to hear your story and your testimonial and how I could possibly help you, and give you the shark wash space to promote what you're doing and the findings that you've come across with your work from an academic background as well. It's obviously so important that we're all selfless and we're not being selfish in this time. We need to be uniting around one another. I've said it over and over again. We need to be looking out for one another, because we are all, to an extent, becoming psychologically overwhelmed with the situation, whether consciously or subconsciously. I mean, we obviously have so many other life stresses that we're dealing with. Guys, our mental health is so important to look after. And this place has become a pivotal point in helping us overcome many of these stresses, has now been affected by that. And I see that. So we all need to band together and get around one another. This is not a place where this is not a time where we should be, hurling abuse at one another, but we should be in that state of wanting to help each other out. at this point in time. Be strong, and we're stronger when we unite together. And we are making a difference at this point in time. This is something that, through the very blessing of social media, where we're able to document this on a scale that is much broader than any media agency really has covered. So yeah, I think we'll leave it there. Faith, you've bared with me now for over an hour and a half. You've done so well. I couldn't thank you enough for your time. And yeah, I guess we'll be in touch. If you enjoyed that content, if you really like listening to the Sharks Cast, and you want to help out Sharkwatch, you want to support what I'm doing, you want to see this project continue to expand and grow and get to a whole bunch of exciting new levels that allow us to unlock more resources, potentially more technology, more experts to have on this Sharkwatch project, why not become an exclusive crew website member? In doing that, you'll have access to direct text shark alerts to your phone in times where there's a shark sighting that has taken place. You'll have discount on merch. You'll have access to exclusive networking events. That's something that's in the pipeline, where I plan to actually partner up with the local tourism organizations to get all of us out as like a big family on the water, having these awesome networking days where we're chatting to one another, exploring different possibilities when it comes to shark safety out in the water, and also just exploring an immersive experience in our local waterways is going to help our confidence and other people around us, whether we have family and friends that's been affected by the trauma of a shark attack, that just invites a more collaborative experience to overcome these life hurdles and challenges from not having secure mitigation measures in place. That's what Sharkwatch is there for. It's to provide awareness for shark safety, and also it's to become a real personal asset to your own journeys out on local waterways. So become an exclusive crew member. The link to the actual website memberships and the plans and pricing is in the follow-up segment of the end of this video here. So stay tuned. I'll also probably put it in the link of this video, so that way you have access to it without excuse. Jump on board and become an exclusive crew Sharkwatch member today. You're going to help grow the Sharkwatch project. We're going to reach new heights, and it's just, God willing, going to be an exciting new way that we can commercialize this project that's going to benefit you, right? And a whole bunch of other water users, coastal offshore water users. We're just a whole bunch of South Australian water lovers, ocean lovers, marine lovers who love our marine ecosystem and want to dive deeper into these matters and explore new solutions. That's what Sharkwatch is there for. We're that new innovative solution, so jump on board today.